4, but there's only 3 of you.
Well, one is for my friend Flintstone. He's not here right now.
Fred Flintstone? You mean that big, good-looking guy? Intelligent, courageous, heart of gold? I know him well.
Gee, I don't think we're talking about the same Flintstone.
When the Flintstones first aired in 1960, it didn't arrive as a harmless cartoon tucked into a children's block. It showed up in the middle of primetime television, surrounded by live-action sitcoms, cigarette sponsors, and an audience that was very much grown up. The show looked friendly. Bright colors, big laughs, Stone Age gags, but underneath that surface was a working-class comedy built on frustration, money stress, advertising pressure, and the kind of marriage arguments most kids had already heard through the walls at night. Over time, that edge faded. Reruns softened it, sponsorships disappeared, memories blurred. What survived was a cleaner version that felt safe, familiar, and easy to sell as nostalgia. These are 16 weird facts about the Flintstones, the cartoon that quietly became something very different from the show that first aired in 1960.
Good luck, Fred. You're gonna need it.
No, please, I don't want to do it. Don't make me do it.
Number 16. The show entered television through the front door. When the Flintstones premiered in 1960, it didn't sneak onto the schedule. It wasn't tucked between children's programming or treated like filler. ABC placed it directly into a primetime slot where audiences were already conditioned to expect live-action sitcoms, adult humor, and familiar social dynamics. That placement carried consequences. Scripts were written to hold attention without relying on constant motion. Scenes were allowed to breathe. Dialogue mattered more than spectacle. Characters argued, negotiated, and complained the way television couples already did, just filtered through animation instead of actors. The network wasn't trying to reinvent cartoons, it was testing whether animation could behave like traditional television. That decision shaped the rhythm of the show before a single character spoke. The pacing, the conflicts, and even the silence between jokes were calibrated for viewers sitting down after dinner, not kids racing through a Saturday morning block. Only years later did that context disappear. Reruns changed expectations. Audiences changed, but the show itself never rewrote its original intention. It arrived on television speaking the language of primetime, and it never fully stopped.
Yeah, I sure look awful when I get up. How can such a handsome guy look so ugly in the morning? Must be the diet.
Number 15. No one knew if adults would stay for a cartoon. When the Flintstones went into production, animation still carried baggage. Cartoons were associated with children, low budgets, and short attention spans. Putting one in prime time meant risking the entire evening lineup on something audiences might dismiss the moment it appeared on screen. Inside the network, the concern wasn't just ratings. It was embarrassment. If adults tuned out, the failure would reinforce the idea that animation belonged only in the margins of television. Writers were aware of that pressure. Episodes were structured carefully, leaning on familiar sitcom rhythms rather than cartoon chaos. The goal wasn't novelty, it was acceptance. That uncertainty shaped how the show behaved. Jokes were paced like live-action comedy. Conflicts unfolded through dialogue instead of spectacle. Characters reacted like adults navigating social tension, not exaggerated figures chasing slapstick. The success of the Flintstones didn't feel inevitable at the time. It felt provisional, week to week. Every episode had to prove that viewers would keep watching. Not despite the animation, but long enough to forget it was animated at all.
So, here I am, forced to serve 2 prehistoric dum-dums until I've proved that I'm reformed.
Number 14. Fred Flintstone was never meant to be agreeable. Fred wasn't designed to charm the audience. He was loud, impulsive, easily frustrated, and often wrong. From the beginning, his personality leaned toward tension rather than comfort, mirroring the kind of flawed working-class characters that powered popular sitcoms of the 1950s. The writers didn't soften him to make him lovable. They let him snap, complain, and double down on bad decisions because that friction drove the stories forward. Fred's temper wasn't a lesson to be corrected every episode. Sometimes it lingered. Sometimes it won. Sometimes it simply reset. Unresolved, the way real behavior often does. That choice anchored the show in adult reality. Viewers weren't asked to admire Fred. They were asked to recognize him. His flaws created conflict with his boss, his neighbors, and his own household. And the comedy lived in that discomfort rather than in moral cleanup. In a medium that would later prioritize likable heroes and tidy endings, Fred stood out as something rougher. He wasn't built to be reassuring. He was built to feel familiar. And that familiarity carried more weight than charm ever could. Number 13. Wilma's role was adjusted to stabilize the show. In the earliest stretch of the series, Wilma wasn't written as a calming presence. She argued back. She challenged Fred directly. Their conversations carried tension that didn't immediately dissolve into reassurance, and their marriage felt closer to a real negotiation than a cartoon partnership. As the show continued, that balance shifted. Wilma's sharpness softened. Her resistance became gentler. Arguments still happened, but they carried less weight and resolved more cleanly. The change wasn't dramatic or sudden. It unfolded quietly, episode by episode, as the series settled into a rhythm that felt easier to sustain week after week. This adjustment didn't erase Wilma's intelligence or agency, but it repositioned her. She became a stabilizing force rather than a counterweight. The emotional temperature of the household dropped, and with it some of the rawness that defined the early episodes. What's important is that this wasn't framed as character growth inside the story. It was structural. Wilma's evolving role helped regulate the show's tone, keeping conflict present but contained, a subtle recalibration that shaped how the series would feel for the rest of its run. Number 12. Work anxiety was built into the show's foundation. Fred's job at the quarry isn't window dressing. It's one of the pressures that quietly drives the entire series. He wakes up early, answers to a boss who holds absolute control over his livelihood, and spends much of his time worried about status, money, and security. The workplace isn't exaggerated into fantasy. It feels repetitive, loud, and exhausting, exactly the way industrial labor felt to many viewers watching at home. Mr. Slate isn't a cartoon villain in the traditional sense. He's impatient, dismissive, and casually threatening, the kind of authority figure who never needs to raise his voice to make his power felt. Fred's fear around him isn't played as weakness, it's practical. Losing that job would unravel everything else in his life, from social standing to domestic stability. What's striking is how often the show returns to that pressure. Raises, demotions, firings, and humiliation aren't one-off jokes. They recur because they reflect a constant reality. Beneath the laughter, the Flintstones carries a steady undercurrent of adult anxiety. The quiet understanding that comfort depends entirely on keeping a job that offers very little comfort in return. Number 11. The laugh track wasn't optional. It was required. When the Flintstones was being shaped for television, the network insisted on something unusual for animation: a full laugh track. At the time, primetime comedy relied heavily on pre-recorded audience reactions, and executives believed viewers would feel uncomfortable watching a sitcom without the familiar rhythm of laughter guiding the jokes. For the writers, this changed how scenes were constructed. Pauses had to be built in. Reactions had to land with enough space for canned laughter to breathe. Dialogue wasn't just written to be funny, it was written to sound funny once the artificial audience responded. The track didn't simply decorate the show, it shaped its timing. Animation offered no real live audience, so every reaction was manufactured. Engineers layered various laugh samples, short bursts, rolling chuckles, surprised gulps, to imitate a studio crowd responding to the antics of prehistoric characters. Over time, viewers internalized that rhythm so deeply that episodes without the laugh track feel empty and strangely tense. The laugh track didn't just make the Flintstones resemble a sitcom, it anchored the show inside television's broader culture. It reminded audiences that this cartoon wasn't an outlier. It was part of the same comedic world as the live-action hits airing beside it, even if every single laugh was invented.
My, that's very good, Freddie.
Thank you, Miss Stonewall. I learned that the hard way.
And now, boys and girls, you have a free period.
Number 10. The show learned to behave once sponsors got comfortable. As the Flintstones settled into prime time, its success brought attention that went far beyond ratings. Sponsors weren't just buying airtime. They were attaching themselves to a program that aired during dinner hours, inside family living rooms week after week. That visibility came with expectations. Nothing dramatic changed overnight. Instead, the show adjusted quietly. Conflict still existed, but it became more predictable. Fred's anger lost some of its volatility. Arguments wrapped up faster. Emotional spikes were smoothed into rhythms that felt familiar and safe to sit beside commercial breaks. This wasn't a case of executives issuing demands, it was a process of calibration. Writers learned which moments lingered uncomfortably and which passed without friction. Over time, stories leaned toward reassurance instead of disruption, not because the characters evolved, but because stability mattered. The result was a show that didn't abandon tension. It managed it. The Flintstones learned how to stay within invisible boundaries shaped by sponsorship comfort, episode by episode. Those limits didn't erase the show's edge, but they defined how far it was allowed to go while remaining valuable to the people paying to keep it on the air. Number 9. The characters once stepped out of the show to sell cigarettes. During its original broadcast, the Flintstones didn't simply pause for commercials. Fred and Barney appeared as themselves during sponsor segments, speaking directly to the audience and casually promoting Winston cigarettes. These moments weren't jokes or parodies. They were treated as a natural extension of the program. At the time, this kind of integration was normal television practice. Sitcom actors regularly endorsed products in character, and animation was folded into that same system. The presence of cartoon figures didn't make the message feel strange. It made it familiar, even friendly. What makes those segments unsettling today is how thoroughly they disappeared. They weren't debated or reframed. They were quietly removed. Reruns and later broadcasts stripped them out entirely, leaving behind a version of the show that feels detached from its original commercial environment. Those ads didn't change how the show was written, but they changed how it was experienced. For early audiences, the Flintstones existed inside a seamless loop of story and advertising. That context vanished over time, reshaping how later viewers understood what kind of show it was meant to be. Quick pause here. If this kind of breakdown is clicking for you, hit the hype button on this video. It's the fastest way to tell YouTube this is worth showing to more people. And if you like these slower, detail-driven dives into iconic movies and cartoons, the ones that don't quite feel the way we remember them, subscribe. That's what this channel is built around. All right, back to the Flintstones. Number 8, the show was paced for listening, not constant movement. The humor in the Flintstones doesn't rush. Scenes stretch longer than expected. Characters argue, explain themselves, and circle the same problem instead of racing toward a punchline. That rhythm wasn't accidental. It reflected how the show was written to be followed as much by ear as by eye. Many of the writers came from radio and early television comedy, where timing lived in delivery rather than action. Jokes landed through cadence, pauses, and repetition. Animation filled the space, but dialogue carried the weight. You could follow an entire scene without watching closely because the words did most of the work. This pacing shaped how the show felt to different audiences. Adults recognized the rhythm immediately. It matched the sitcoms they already watched. Children often found it slower, even dull, because it didn't chase attention with non-stop motion or visual chaos. That choice anchored the series in a specific television tradition. The Flintstones wasn't built to overwhelm viewers with activity. It was built to sit in the room with them, unfolding at the speed of conversation, a quality that made it feel more like evening television than a cartoon designed to compete for a child's focus. Number 7. Bamm-Bamm's arrival nearly broke the show's continuity, and fans loved it anyway. When Bamm-Bamm debuted, it wasn't just a cute addition to the cast. He arrived through one of the strangest story decisions the writers ever made. The Rubbles suddenly find a super strong infant on their doorstep with no explanation other than a mysterious note claiming he was meant for them. No pregnancy arc, no buildup, no biological logic, just a baby who could lift cars and snap stone furniture in half. What shocked the studio was the reaction. Instead of questioning the bizarre setup, viewers embraced Bamm-Bamm immediately. Ratings spiked, merchandise demand jumped. Episodes featuring him became some of the most replayed in syndication. The character was so popular that the writers had to rework story outlines to give him space, even though the series had never planned for him. The weirdest part is what came next. The show quietly rewrote his origin in later seasons, smoothing out contradictions and downplaying the supernatural strength that first defined him. But by then, none of it mattered. Fans had already bonded with the character the moment he smashed his first prehistoric boulder. Bamm-Bamm wasn't created to expand mythology. He was created to jolt attention, and he did it so effectively that the show bent itself around him. Number 6. The animation system was built to keep the show alive. Producing a weekly primetime series was expensive, and the Flintstones had to operate under limits that didn't exist for theatrical animation. The solution wasn't artistic minimalism, it was efficiency. Walk cycles were reused, backgrounds looped, characters often stopped moving while dialogue carried the scene forward. These choices shaped how the show functioned. Writing adapted to the constraints. Conversations grew longer. Reactions happened in voice rather than motion. Familiar settings repeated until they became part of the show's rhythm. What looked simple on screen represented a carefully balanced system designed to stretch every dollar without collapsing the production. That system didn't stay confined to one series. It became a template. Hanna-Barbera refined it and applied it across multiple shows, effectively defining how television animation would operate for decades. Limited movement stopped being a flaw and became a standard. What's easy to miss is how much pressure sits behind that approach. Every reused frame reflects a calculation. Every still moment represents a compromise that kept the series running week after week. The Flintstones didn't just survive under that system, it helped normalize it. Number 5. Pebbles was almost a boy, until a toy company changed the script overnight. When the writers first outlined Wilma's pregnancy arc, the plan was simple. The baby would be a boy. Storyboards, early drafts, and internal memos all referred to Fred Jr. The writers were already shaping jokes around Fred trying and failing to raise a son in his own image. It was locked in creatively, until a licensing executive walked in with a completely different perspective. A toy company approached Hanna-Barbera with a proposal. If the baby was a girl, they could produce a Pebbles doll that they believed would sell millions. A baby boy, they argued, wouldn't move merchandise at all. The studio looked at the numbers, paused production, and within a single day, the decision was made.
A girl? Wilma, she's beautiful. She looks just like you.
A chip off the old block, huh, Fred?
All scripts were revised, all artwork updated. Pebbles went from Fred Jr. to a marketable character whose entire existence hinged on a commercial instinct, not a creative one. The gamble worked instantly. Pebbles dolls exploded in popularity, outselling expectations and becoming one of the most profitable pieces of Flintstones merchandising ever made. Inside the writing room, Pebbles' personality was then shaped around this new commercial momentum, cute, iconic, and visually distinct. The irony is that Pebbles became a beloved character, not because she fit the show's plans, but because a merchandise opportunity reshaped the story before it even aired. A single business decision quietly redirected the entire family dynamic. Number 4. The original Flintstones pilot was lost for decades, and nobody noticed until the 90s. Before the Flintstones premiered, Hanna-Barbera produced a rough pilot called The Flagstones. It was never meant for public viewing, just a proof of concept to pitch the show to networks. But once ABC picked up the series, the pilot disappeared into storage, literally. No one knew where it went. For years, the existence of the pilot became something like a studio rumor. Animators who worked on it remembered fragments, slightly different character designs, an early version of the theme, and a joke structure that felt rougher than the final show. But there was no tape, no record, nothing to confirm what actually aired in that room during the pitch meeting. Then, in the early 1990s, more than 3 decades later, the pilot resurfaced in a vault during a routine archival search. When staff screened it, they realized they were looking at a piece of Flintstones history no one alive at the studio had seen in its entirety. The designs were off, the timing was strange, and the show looked like an alternate universe version of Bedrock. The rediscovery was such a surprise that Hanna-Barbera publicly released the pilot for the first time, treating it like a newly unearthed artifact. What was once a forgotten sales tool instantly became one of the most fascinating glimpses into how the series actually began. Number 3. The theme song people associate with the show arrived late. The opening music most people immediately recognize wasn't part of the Flintstones from the beginning. Early episodes used a different instrumental theme that set a flatter, less distinctive tone before the story even started. It worked, but it didn't define the series. That changed when the now famous Meet the Flintstones theme was introduced. The song added warmth, momentum, and a sense of identity that reshaped how audiences experienced the show from the first second. It framed the cartoon as friendly and familiar before any dialogue or conflict appeared on screen. Over time, that theme became inseparable from the series. The earlier opening vanished from memory, replaced so completely that most viewers assumed the show always sounded that way. The shift didn't just change the introduction, it changed the emotional entry point into every episode. Even the sound of the Flintstones was refined after the show was already established. Like many parts of its identity, what feels original today was actually a later decision that proved so effective it rewrote how the series is remembered. Number 2. Pebbles was introduced as a ratings event, not a story necessity. Pebbles Flintstone didn't arrive naturally into the series. She arrived strategically. When the show was deep into its run, the writers introduced a pregnancy and birth storyline designed to refresh attention and give audiences a reason to tune in week to week. This wasn't about expanding the family dynamic, it was about momentum. Television at the time treated major life events as spectacles. Weddings, births, and crises were used to spike interest, and the Flintstones followed that pattern closely. Wilma's pregnancy was stretched across episodes, discussed openly, and framed as a milestone moment rather than a background change. Once Pebbles arrived, the show didn't radically transform. Fred didn't become calmer. Domestic tension didn't vanish. Work stress didn't ease. Parenthood existed more as a symbol than a driver of new storytelling. The baby was present, but the structure stayed the same. What Pebbles really changed was perception. The image of a baby solidified the idea of the Flintstones as family-centric television, even though the core dynamics remained adult. The birth didn't soften the show. It softened how audiences remembered it. A single narrative event quietly helped lock the series into a more comforting cultural box, whether the episodes themselves earned it or not. Number 1. The name locked the show into prime time before it ever aired. Before a single episode was broadcast, the Flintstones had to sound like it belonged next to live-action sitcoms. Early working titles floated around during development, but they lacked weight. They sounded temporary, like experiments rather than a series meant to last. The Flintstones solved that problem instantly. The name felt solid, physical, and confident. It didn't signal novelty or childishness. It sounded like a show that could sit comfortably in a primetime lineup without explanation. That perception mattered more than it seems. Networks, advertisers, and audiences all respond to framing before content ever arrives. A strong title doesn't just label a show, it sets expectations. The Flintstones promised something sturdy and familiar, even before viewers understood what the cartoon actually was. That expectation helped the series enter television through the front door, not as a curiosity, but as a program meant to compete. By the time audiences pressed play, the show had already done part of its work. The name had positioned it as legitimate television, not a novelty experiment. That framing didn't guarantee success, but without it, the show may never have been given the chance to succeed at all. The Flintstones didn't survive because it was simple. It survived because it adapted. It learned how to fit inside prime time, how to live with sponsors, how to endure repetition, and how to outlast the context it was originally built for. What we remember today isn't wrong. It's incomplete. The show didn't change in one moment. Its identity shifted gradually, shaped by television habits, commercial systems, and decades of reuse. The rough edges faded not because they failed, but because familiarity made them invisible. That's what makes the Flintstones unusual. It looks like a children's cartoon, but it carries the structure and pressure of adult television. It didn't chase timelessness. It earned it by adjusting to whatever the medium demanded next. If this kind of slow, detail-driven breakdown is your thing, hit the hype button so YouTube knows to push this video to more people. And if you want more strange stories hiding behind iconic movies and cartoons, subscribe. That's exactly what this channel is built for. That's what makes the Flintstones iconic.